So, Paul, welcome to the show. I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today.
Thanks, Aaron. No, that was a thrilling and exciting opening. I was a little scared.
Yeah, I always like to at the very start. I like to go, I guess, back to the start with the guest and find out, and I suppose to tailor it to your journey and your experience so far.
Mhm.
What was it that initially drew you to writing in general, and then maybe with the twist of like a lot of it being kind of horror adjacent, or maybe some of the scarier stuff?
Yeah. I don't know, it's really kind of hard to explain how I got into writing because it doesn't make much sense. Certainly, given like what I was studying as a student, because when I went to, in the States, when I went to college, undergraduate, I was a math and humanities major, and had no interest in writing, and I wasn't even like really a reader for pleasure. Like I was a horror fan, but like my almost all of my horror sort of consumption was TV and film. And then like my last year at school, I sort of fell into an English class and really hit it off with the professor because we were both punk fans. Anyway, so we read a couple of stories that people would probably call like horror adjacent, but like Joyce Carol Oates's "Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been?" which is a really tightly constructed psychological piece. Um, and I remember thinking like, oh, I didn't know people wrote things like this. And so I went to graduate school for math again. I just started dating my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time. And when she was a teenager, she read all of Stephen King, and she had started, she bought me like King's The Stand for my 22nd birthday. And when I went away to grad school for 2 years and we did the long distance relationship thing, I just fell in love with reading Stephen King. And through him, I found, Clive Barker and Peter Straub and Shirley Jackson. And at the end of those 2 years, I just had this weird itch to try at the 2 years of grad school that I got my degree by the skin of my teeth. I had this weird itch, inexplicable itch to try writing a story. And I remember thinking, it's like, oh, you have no business even trying to write a story. Like, why? And I think part of what made me want to do it, I was just so excited by these things I was reading. I wanted to try to do something like that. I think I'm glad I learned it. Like, even if maybe I learned it later than some people, but like the idea that it's okay to be passionate about things. And I liked what I was reading so much. I wanted to try it. And so that was like in the mid to late 90s and just sort of stuck with it. And it was a really long, slow process or climb.
Yeah, and that's something that I always try and like, I guess, dive into. A lot of people would probably look at you now and think, it's just like a overnight kind of thing. It's like, oh, I see your new book everywhere. Wow, it's all great. But I think what you said there was key about the idea of it was this long, slow process
Oh
to
yeah.
go from this point here where I had this idea of like, I might want to write a story, to being where you are. But I guess in layman's terms, or like the shorthand version, what does that journey actually look like to go from, I guess, like you said, not really being an avid reader to starting to enjoy reading a lot, to saying, you know what, I might like to write my own story, to then actually like structuring an actual book?
Yeah. That's a great question. I don't think anyone's ever like phrased it that way before. And I would say first and foremost, it's a delight and I've known this, but to think, 30 years, I guess I've been sort of, when I first started messing around with writing, it was about 30 years ago, very much a hobby for 5 years. Um, but I'm happy to say I still have, when it comes to reading, first and foremost, the spark. Like when I read something that really excites me, it makes me want to try something. It's not that I think, oh, I can do as good as they can. It's usually the total opposite. It's like, oh, I could never do something that cool. But maybe if I could take a little bit of a spark from their fire, I could build my own little weird thing. Um, so it still, I'm happy to say, starts with that. Like, so I make sure, I for me, reading is as big and as an important part of the job as the writing itself. I tend to read between 60 and 80 novels a year. I'd say most of the time it's closer to 80. And I've been doing that for, 30 years now. And that's how I learned how to write. Like, I mean, and I know listen, the other thing for anyone who's listening, who's starting writing, like the fun and frustrating part is no one can tell you how to do it. I mean, they can give you like offer like, hey, this is how I did it, or this is how other people do it. Like, so like, no, going in, like, it's cool. You can find your own way, but I know it's frustrating too, because so many of us just want like, hey, what's the path? Show me the path. And so for me, it's like I've learned through reading, to the point where like if I'm like, I know some writers who don't want to read things that or don't read when they're writing because they fear it's going to mess with them, and like I'm the total opposite. When I'm really going well with my writing, like I'm reading even more, uh, and open and try to remain open to like the little serendipitous things that might occur while I'm reading another book or something like that.
And as regards like I guess I don't know your structure for this or like your way of thinking, but is it something where do you like, I don't know, carry a notebook or like maybe something like an app on your
I have 1,000 little notebooks lying around. Like I just reach and here's another one. Like, and so it looks big when I'm, but small notebooks. And so those are my idea notebooks. Like I'll jot things down. Um, and if it's a novel, I typically start with a notebook first. And when I say start with the notebook first, I won't start writing. I'll just maybe like come up with character names and try to come up with their descriptions, or write a little bit about the what if. And depending upon the book or the story, maybe trying to scratch out some plot ideas. Um, but when it comes to actual writing of the story, it has to be on the laptop. I wish I could write longhand, but I can't. Like I know, like Clive Barker famously has like manuscripts in longhand that I think I read this correctly or heard this correctly, that he kept some in the freezer too, which is kind of weird, but I don't know.
Yeah, I've heard that too.
Okay, good. I'm not making it up.
Yeah, I've heard that too. And how would you say then, I guess, from those early days where, like you said, you kind of done it as more of a hobby and for the fun of it, I guess it hadn't yet turned into a career. How would you say your writing process has evolved from then to, when it's obviously now like it's this career and it's kind of I don't want to say
Yeah.
it's become something you have to do, but like it's how you make your living. Like I said, like I'm on the other side of the world and I see your latest book everywhere.
Well, that's good to hear. Thank you. Yeah, I mean it's a weird balance. The one that I'm still trying to. I hope I'll always be trying to figure it out. I don't want to ever think, oh, this is just this thing that's going to happen and it's no big deal. No, I constantly worry about what's the next book idea or where it's going to come from. Um, I wish I was someone who had like all these ideas waiting for me. And typically, I go from novel to novel. And like when I finish a novel, it's like, oh crap, I have to come up with something else. I don't know what it is yet. What if I run out of ideas? Um, but I try to rely on the things that we mentioned before, like, or getting sparks or inspiration from other stories. Or I'm a big music nerd too, so like so many of my books have started, or at least titles have come from or reference like song titles. And I don't know, it's just about like trying to remain open to ideas. Um, and it is a balance because now like I'm sort of very lucky and a privileged position to have like contracts where like, hey, these novels which I haven't even like considered yet or due, and like at this date, which is its own weird little pressure. Um, so that's a long way of saying I don't know how much my process has changed. Like I kind of approach it the same way, although I will say I try to do little things to make it feel different every time, because I don't want it to feel like, oh, it's like this weird story factory that my brain is, because it's not.
Yeah.
So that's why I end up like changing notebooks frequently, or like some books I'll write an outline, some I won't, just to try to make it feel different maybe than the one before, because it is going to be a different experience ultimately.
And so for you then, like the idea for a story or a book can kind of come from anywhere. Like um I've spoken to people in the past. I've listened to interviews with, with other writers, with other what and in whatever medium it may be.
Yeah.
And some say, okay, I have to have my tagline, or I have to start with my basic idea. Like it's going to be a slasher, it's going to be psychological, it's going to be supernatural. But for you, can it just literally start with like a character name and then go from there?
Yeah. So, I mean, I write a lot of short stories too. So I'd say, for short stories, that's certainly like maybe like a quick what if, or a quick, character bit, or, um, but sometimes I've had to force the issue. Like I mentioned, having contracts. So like sometimes I've actively thought of, the horror genre, like, with A Head Full of Ghosts, the novel that sort of like really saved my career or made my career, or both. It actually I'm giving a credit for both. Um, I happened to be reading a bunch of essays about the movie and Blatty's novel, The Exorcist, and in 2013, just about more than 10 years ago, I was thinking, oh, no one's really written a possession novel in a while. How would I do one? And I just kind of followed that logic through line. And my most recent book, I had, horror movie. I wasn't even thinking about that book. I had actually had another idea for a book that I wasn't in love with. So I was still sort of just trying to remain open to the universe for story ideas. And then I happened to be, just for fun, listening to the audiobook of Chainsaw Confidential, which is the book that Gunnar Hansen wrote about his experiences on set. And by the end of that book, I started thinking about, I want to write about a cursed movie. And to me, that's when it's fun. The fun part is that discovery. And then, I try to make every discovery go through a little bit of a time test. Like, I think all of us, when we have an idea, we're excited. Of course, you're excited when you first have an idea. But to me, the real test is, does it linger? Does it just keep picking at my, at my subconscious, like weeks later? To me, that's the sign. Okay, I think this is something I'll be willing to spend a year plus, living with, because that's how long it takes for me to do a book. And for the ideas that sort of lose steam, then they just sort of go in the dustbin or into a notebook for a later day or something.
Yeah, and at least for me anyway, like I feel from having read a lot of your work, like Cabin at the End of the World, for example, or the latest with horror movie, I can't help but feel, and maybe this is not your feeling, your opinion, but I feel like there's a lot of like cinematic qualities to them. Is that something that you consciously have thought about in your more recent work, that like how it may translate to a film? And is that something that you I guess envision? Like, is that something that you would like to see? Is that the goal? Because I've spoken to, I would have assumed and again, this is just based on me, that when, if I wrote a book, I would always see that as like the next stage is like, okay, well, someone feels that this is great enough that they want to like bring it to life. Is that something you actively work towards, or do you see that as the story starts to develop, was like, okay, I can see how this vision, like I can actually see it?
Great question. I mean, once I'm finished, of course, like I'll daydream and think about, I wonder if someone would try to adapt this. But honestly, like while I'm writing a book especially, well, I mean, or even a short story, while I'm writing, I'm not thinking about how would this look on screen, or what can I do to it to make it appeal to screen better. In fact, I'm trying to do with what tools I have the total opposite. Like I think it was, I'm sure other writers said it, but I think Zadie Smith once said that, like, you should be writing books so that story, its best form is the book.
Yeah.
Like that's the best way to write.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And if someone wants to adapt it, let them figure out like how to do that kind of thing. So I mean, it's kind of funny. Like I will admit, like when writing horror movie, when I was writing about a movie, at certain points in the book, I was sort of thinking about how in the past people have said, "Oh, your writing's like very cinematic," and like I'm not 100% sure what that means. And sometimes I think it's a secret backhanded insult. I'm not saying you're insulting me, but coming from, like, if it's coming from somebody in the literary world. But at the same time, I mean, honestly, it makes sense. My first 20 years of introduction to story, or my understanding of what story was from age 5 to early 20s, was film and TV. Like, I mean, I was a child of 80s cable television, and can't tell you how much television I watched, or how many movies on cable, and VCR tapes and all that. So yeah, I mean, my formative years outside of going to school, because I really wasn't doing much hanging out as a teenager. I was kind of at my house just by myself most of the time watching things. How can that not inform sort of what I'm doing, or infect what I'm doing?
Yeah, and I definitely feel maybe I didn't structure that.
Oh no, it's a great question. Yeah, because I mean, I do get that asked sometimes. And sorry, I tend to ramble. I should have apologized at the start.
No. I just
rambled. Yeah.
I at least for me anyway, it's like I read a lot, and I read a lot of straight horror adjacent, kind of sci-fi, supernatural, anything in that kind of, I guess, realm. And there's times I read something, I enjoy it, and I think what I meant by cinematic is like and I guess maybe it technically, when I think about it, it kind of says the opposite of what I was trying to say, in the sense of when I read your work, I'm like in the story in my
Right.
head.
You're
It
visualizing it.
reminds
Yeah.
me of like when I was a kid, and like, at a much obviously toned down and like diluted kid version, but like with something like I remember when I first started reading Goosebumps, and it was like that imagination. It would just take me away. I
Yeah.
was just like the pages would take me away. I think that's kind of where I saw it, but I can kind of see what you mean now about the difference between the medium that it comes on. It's like I'm not necessarily writing a story for it to be adapted.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, that makes total sense. And I mean, and especially for me, and I don't think I've ever talked about this before. Like when I'm writing scenes of action, I'm certainly visualizing it. At the same time, like worried about how the rhythm of the sentence goes. But but some of my favorite, and to me, those are my least favorite parts of writing, because I feel like that's the hardest thing to do. I remember a giant section of The Cabin at the End of the World where um, Eric, no, Andrew, when he leaves the house, breaks into the car and, tries to get the gun, comes back in, and there's all like this, action I had to describe. It took me so long to write. So I wanted to make it feel real, but also like I wanted to make sure it was sort of like the physical movements were accurate. And that part, to me, it feels like work. The part that I sort of connect to and enjoy more are when we get to like moments of interiority and character, which you have to do differently in film. And I am no expert in film. I've written only like a few screenplays just for shits and giggles kind of thing. But I mean, that's to me what draws me to the novel as a form, or to a short story, to reading as a form, is you get to have that interiority. You get to have these weird insights into a character in a different way than you do when you're watching film.
Maybe you've just answered that question already, but I was going to ask: is there a part of the journey of bringing something to life that you find the most difficult or frustrating, or like a lot of people say, oh, I find it so hard when I have an idea to just get something down and start to flesh it out. Then other people say when they hit that like middle bump, and it's like, oh, I don't know whether to abandon this story before I get any further. And some people are like, I don't know how to wrap it up. Is there a part for you that you find particularly like, this is always the point I feel like I get to when I'm
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, so like we touched a little bit on what's the most difficult. I mean, for me, like plot, probably because I'm like the least, which might sound strange, least interested in plot as a reader. I'm much more interested in emotion and character. And like as a reader, I'm talking about me as a reader now. Like I have terrible recall of books details, almost embarrassingly so, because I have like friends. Like I don't know if you ever read John Langan, who's brilliant. The Fisherman is one of the best books. Like he's read everything, and he has like this encyclopedic memory of these things that happen in all these books. And it's me, is like, oh yeah, I like that book. Like what I remember is sort of how that book made me feel. That's the thing that sort of stays with me. And so I feel like, maybe I kind of approach it the same way as a writer. Shoot, there was something else to the answer that was actually going to answer your question. Where'd it go? Yeah. So, I mean, because I've written a whole bunch of novels at this point, which is crazy. Like, I think the first thing that was hard for me to do when I first tried writing novels was to finish them. Like, my first novel sold in 2007. It appeared in 2009, but it was really like the fourth or fifth and a half that I'd written. Like the first attempts, I didn't finish, weren't good. So yeah, the first time you're writing a novel is like, getting past the points in the middle, as you reference. Yeah, the middle is always the scariest. I think that's something that a lot of writers have in common, is you're at the excitement at the beginning. And especially how I typically work. I usually know, well, obviously I know the beginning of a story, and I typically know the end, or a hazy version of the end. And then the hard part is bridging. How do I get from A to Z, or how do I get from A and earn Z, kind of thing. Oh yeah, so there are magical, like 100 pages is a magical number for me, because I've quit other projects at that mark. And then also 40,000 words feels like a point of no return too, because then it's officially a novel. If you're going by some of the the genre literary awards. So yeah, I'm definitely, and I use those to help motivate me. Like, okay, if I can make it past this thing, then this is going to be a thing. And honestly, so much of the daily writing life is, trying to motivate yourself into doing something that's most days hard to do. There are the magical days where it's like, oh, that was really cool, but most days it's like, oh, this sucks. I'm not very good. This part was lame. But also, just learning to embrace sort of the marathon aspect of a novel of like every day is different. And I like that part of it. I enjoy that part of the novel of it, this thing living with you for a year. And like, it's impossible to anticipate like what things that are going to happen in your life, even just like fun little random things that are going to inform the story that you didn't think were going to inform the story.
There's definitely something to that, and the more people I think I speak with, the more it starts to kind of dawn on me about that unique skill that people like yourself have, where you still have a lot of those thoughts about this sucks, or this was terrible, or I spent an entire day today and this just didn't, like, I just don't feel good about this, and or I've had a really bad week. It just seems to be compounding into this big thing. But to continue to kind of push through that and grit through that, I think so many people feel that and then go, oh, well, I'm obviously just like not good, and I obviously can't do this ever. And just allow that to kind of, I mean, for example, if you had have allowed that to stop you many, many years ago, you wouldn't have gotten to the point that you're at now. And it just seems like it makes me think about, maybe other people out there who might be listening to this that have an idea or have something they want to finish, and they just allow that little thing to take over and go, you know what, just like, this is just a dumb idea. Just put this away and forget about it.
I mean, some of it is, I'm going to describe myself as dumb persistence and patience. But I mean that in a good way of like, sure, you can rationalize like, oh, this is hard. There are a million other books being published. Like, why? Like, if you let those sort of thoughts sort of take over, as opposed to, it's like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to write this. Even if it's only a couple hundred words today, tomorrow will go better. Just the idea of, and the more you do it, I mean, it's like anything else. The more you do it, you'll train yourself to do things. I don't want to hesitate to say it'll be easier. Like, some of the things will be easier, not the writing, but the sitting down in the chair and staying there for an hour will become easier if you do that every day, or an hour and a half. And I'm lucky that I've had some good mentors, like a great American novelist, Stuart Onan, who's written some horror, but he's also written just all over the place. Years ago, he told me he used to like literally belt himself to his chair. He's like, all right, I'm going to be here for 2 hours. And sometimes I've had to do that. I've never belted myself to the chair, but what I've found, because I've done it enough, I feel like I've trained my subconscious to help me out, is that like, even in the worst days where it's like I sit and stare at the screen for 5 minutes, at a certain point, the subconscious knows that I'm not going to give up. And it says, all right, fine.
Yeah.
If you're just going to sit there, this is boring, I'll give you something. The other two I want to throw out there too, which I think is very helpful, that I've been saying to people, and they're from other brilliant writers, Stephen Graham Jones, and not to minimize like the idea of that there can't be writer's block, but I like thinking of it in Stephen's terms to help if you need the help to push it through. Stephen Graham Jones says he doesn't believe in writer's block. He says your standards are just too high, which hopefully makes you laugh. Take a breath. And I have another friend who mentioned like the hard parts, the middle parts. He's like, oh, I welcome those in my work, because that means the breakthrough that comes next, that's going to be the best stuff of the story. So again, anything that you think can motivate you as a writer or is useful, take it, use it all. Be a magpie, take everything.
It's funny you mentioned about the subconscious, and I know you probably didn't mean it in a quite literal sense, but it just reminded me of there's an Irish mentalist, brain hacker, whatever you want to call him, and he wrote a book a couple of years ago called Brain Hacks, and he actually speaks a lot about there's all these different conferences with like MBA teams and different things like that, and the idea of, he seems to think that you can actually like train your subconscious into exactly what you just said, in the sense of like, at a point it realizes that like, oh, I'm not in control any longer. This is something that we're repeatedly going to do. So I need to either lock in or we're just going to be here. So
Yeah.
something needs to happen. And it's like that action, just build that action over time. Do you have like then a solid structure to your day, or is it a case of you just kind of wait and you start to feel it and then you go and do it? Or do you just say, right, okay, at 10 a.m. every day, I'm going to sit for 2 hours, or at
Yeah.
12, I'm going to sit for 2 hours?
So I've been a high school math teacher for, Jesus, I'll say it, 30 years at this point, and I still am. I did take a year sabbatical fairly recently when the Cabinet at the End of the World movie came out. So,
Mhm.
when I first started having some selling short stories, the funny part was like my life had never been busier. Like my first son was just born, and so for me, writing was, I really wanted to do it, so I had to find the time, and it was me. It was like a time management lesson, and and this is back in the the first decade of the 2000s, I would say. Um, I couldn't afford like to sit down and wait for it. I couldn't afford like writing rituals. It was like, no, if I have 45 minutes, I'm going to sit down and write for 45 minutes. Uh, and I did enough that I was able to do that. I mean, I can't tell you. I wish I've sort of lost a little bit of that skill because having to be on social media and online promotion has sort of taken over some of the stealing of free time. But like, I used to, if the kids were taking a quiz, I used to be able, I was writing a story. They could have been cheating their ass off, but I had no idea. Or
Yeah.
if like, when my kids were older, taking them to like a baseball clinic and, there with headphones on and baseballs are flying around, but I'm writing because I had 2 hours and like, okay, I'm going to use these 2 hours. Um, so yeah, so you'd be surprised what you can sort of train and accidentally train your brain. Like your self-conscious is going to be accidentally trained by your actions. And it's kind of fun. Like, that so many of my ideas and breakthroughs come in the shower. I mean, it's ridiculous. I don't think it's anything mystical to do with the water. I think it's just because a few times it happened. So now my brain's like, oh, this is the place where we have
Yeah.
breakthroughs. Or I mean, it makes sense. Like a time like that where you're not actively thinking, or if you're taking a walk or doing the dishes or something, that's when so many ideas come. So no, I totally believe in the ability to train your subconscious.
How, like you mentioned, continuing to work as a math teacher, and then we get to a point like where the book is getting turned into a movie. That's got to be like a weird, I don't know, nearly like out of body experience, right? To be, and especially it wasn't one of these things where it was optioned or somebody picked it up and it was kind of going to maybe I don't want to say a lesser, but like
Yeah.
maybe a VOD or something like that. Like this became like this huge thing with these huge names attached to it. What was that experience like to kind of sit back, or how long did it take for you to get a chance to actually sit back in the middle of all that and go, wow, this is actually happening? Because I feel like for me, something like that, it's just another step of like solidifying, I guess, your legacy.
Wow. Yeah. So it's funny. There've been times recently I was like, oh yeah, that happened.
Yeah.
Because it's been a few years now. But I don't know. In the moment, I mean, it was like sort of like it was optioned before, for a good 2 to 3 years before M Night sort of came on board. So now I'd been through the optioning process where things had failed. So like you kind of like try not to get too high. You get excited. It's nice to get a little bit of money for nothing. uh yeah, but like then you're in it, and then it becomes like this day to day thing, and it's both way less magical, but also still like more awesome than you could have imagined. Like it's weird place where like there are frustrations, but then like you get mad at yourself, like if you told yourself 10 years ago this was happening, why in the world are you frustrated? But again, it's just another facet of so movie business is something I'm certainly not an expert, don't understand. So like, kind of went into it a little bit like not naive, but certainly open-eyed in a way.
Yeah.
So yeah, so it was weird, it was fun, it was frustrating, it was life-changing. Um, but there certainly were moments of like where I did get to sit back and go, holy shit, this is happening. Like getting to
Mm.
visit the set for 2 days and seeing like this cabin built and the actors dressed up like the ones that lived in my head for in a year and a half. It was just a really weird, in a good way, head spinning experience. Something I hope that a lot of writers get to experience. It's just fun that, especially as a writer who gets inspiration from so many other things. It was cool to see, someone else take this thing I created and, sort of do their own thing with it.
Is it obviously like without getting too in depth into it, and it can just be as simple as a yes or no answer if you
Yeah.
please. Is it difficult as a creative when something like that happens? Because I can see all the pros and all the like, this is amazing, this is cool, I can't believe this. But then as a creative and somebody who like has that creative mind and like you said, you spend years sometimes with these stories and these characters.
Yeah.
Difficult then at times to hand that off to somebody else and then to see it kind of maybe molded into a different version of that? Or is that something that once you know what's happening, you just have to kind of, okay, well,
Yeah.
it's not really its own thing?
No, I mean, I'd be lying if I said it wasn't difficult, to hand it away to somebody else. Because we talked earlier about like, oh, like I try to write this thing as this is the best form or the best way or the best way that I can come up with to tell the story. And so then decisions get made on the story that are different than what you made, and I feel like I have reasons why that would be a bad decision. It can be a little weird, but yeah, I mean, for me, like when I mentioned frustrations, like to me, like the changes in the story was like the least frustrating part of the experience. More of the frustrating part was like, I don't know, the business parts that I still don't understand about movie posters and trailers and the like.
Yeah, I've heard
Yeah,
that.
so I've also, I've read, geez, I'm up to like 3 different versions of A Head Full of Ghosts screenplay, and each time that's a little bit. So each one's been pretty different. It's been fun and weird reading them all, but again, if there are problems, great problems to have.
Is there and I don't know if this is something that like I assume you're still like I guess open to the idea of if people want to option your work and things like that.
Mhm.
That's something that you'd still be, I guess, okay with doing,
Oh,
regardless of
absolutely.
the
Yeah, yeah,
terms. So, with that in mind, then, is there ever maybe this is not even a thing because I don't know how either side of this business works.
yeah,
Um, like, is there ever a conversation where it can be like, okay, well, we're going to do this, but like, I need to have some form of like involvement, or because
yeah,
I've heard some horror stories about, and not good ones that people are thinking like about maybe people supposed to have some form of like creative input or
right,
in like the final word, but like even just to be involved, and then as the thing evolves, they just kind of like eventually end up sitting on the other side of the door.
right.
And it's like, yeah, you're out there. Just
So with Cabin, I had no contractual say over anything. So in some ways, it was easier just to let go.
yeah,
If I were to be lucky enough to have something else actually, make it to screen, I've been slowly trying to get a little bit more say, or some say, I should say. Um, it's I haven't. Well, that's not true. With one of my short stories, I helped write a screenplay with another director, writer, producer. He did most of the work, but he let me sort of come in and like rewrite some parts, which was really cool of him. So yeah, if and when I do leave teaching, perhaps one of the things I would pursue as well as novel writing would be maybe more actively adapting something of my own. But that's hard to say for sure. I certainly wouldn't be. I hope I'm not so arrogant to think that I would know how to write the perfect screenplay. I mean, I certainly don't. That's like a whole nother sort of writing form that I
mhm.
haven't studied for other than watching movies. Um, yeah, so like a vague notion of I'd like more say. It's really kind of story dependent too. Like, it depends on the story, what level I would want. I think too.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, I something I want to go back to, which because I think it's something that I always try to like add value for the listener a lot of times. And obviously, I can't add a huge amount of value. It's always the person on the other side of the interview or the chat that is the one I feel like they can add the value. But if I can maybe bring that to the surface, a key thing you said about the fact that like you still work in quotations a regular job.
Yeah,
That's something I think that's probably lost on a lot of people. Like they would go, yeah, but your book is in like every bookstore like around the globe. What do you mean? What do you mean? Like, what do you mean you work
Yeah.
Monday to Friday or whatever way? Um, what would you say to people who, I guess, struggle with that? Because, like you mentioned, you've got a family, you've got this thing that you have this huge passion for. It has at times taken off to like astronomical heights, but you also have your work, and it's like
Yeah.
to juggle and spin all those plates.
Yeah. I mean, full disclosure, I mean, I think the books have done well enough that I probably could have left the job. Um, so some of that is just me. I do like teaching, but also maybe also not to psychoanalyze myself, but my dad was a factory worker, my mom was a bank teller, and money was always a big deal, and them fighting over it. And so I do think there's a a part of me that always worries, like, the writing thing's gonna stop working, and then we're gonna, have a lot less money. So I've always viewed the teaching thing as a financial safety net as well as a good job, that allows me to write what I want. Like, especially, in the years where like my first two novels didn't sell well at all, like in 2009, 2010, my publisher dropped me. Uh, I was not a happy writer after that. I can't lie about that. But like, I just kept plugging. I was like, well, I'm going to write what I want, like whatever weird thing happens, because I'm still a teacher, as opposed to having to scramble and try to figure out what the market wants. Um, you mentioned my kids are both, like, one just graduated college, one is in college, and as I'm sure you know, in the United States, college is obscenely expensive. Especially if you're going to a private, liberal arts school and not a state school. So, the books have done well enough that I'm not complaining. Again, happy to have this problem, happy to do this for my kids. But the money is, or the books have done well enough that we're not getting financial aid. We're paying the full freight for college. So I'm like, Jesus, that's a lot of money. I'm going to keep teaching until they're done, kind of thing. But yeah, so I mean, those are some of the things
Is
that
it
I guess I think
difficult then
about.
for you to because I feel like there's probably people out there, and I don't mean this as a slight on anybody, but there's a lot of people out there who want to pursue some sort of creative endeavor,
Yeah,
and there's this fascination with like the idea of being burnt out, and it's like, oh, I'm so burnt out. And like I hear this from, like, I'm in my mid 30s, so I hear this from people say 15 years younger than me that have done something that they're passionate about for 6 months.
yeah.
They don't have any kids. They don't, like, they have like a part-time job and they don't do anything else. And it's like, oh, I'm so burnt out. And I'm like, well, a lot of these people that I've spoken to have got like, it seems like they have like 20 jobs all at one time
Yeah,
for multiple decades and continue to push through it. And I think that's the difference between like quote unquote making it and maybe not, is like having that grit and determination and that passion. Is it difficult for you, like, to maybe not suffer from burnout, or when you decide like now is my off time, or I want to just like not have all these ideas and all this stuff spinning around in my head? Is it difficult to switch between the two?
oh, absolutely. I procrastinate like anybody else, and I'd rather look at my phone. I daydream of just sitting on the couch all day and watching all the things on streaming that I don't have the time to watch, for, most days. Um, but there's something that just makes me keep coming back, to the laptop. Um, so listen, like I mentioned, I took a year off from teaching. What was that, 2022? Yeah, it was 22 into 23, that academic year. And so, and when I went back to teaching, holy crap, I was only a year off, but like that first fall, like I was telling Lisa, I was like, how did I do this before? Like, I'm so exhausted just after teaching. I lost it after like a year. Um, I'm obviously older now and don't have like, the same energy I had when I was in my, 20s, 30s. So I don't know. I mean, ultimately, it comes down to want to. What do you want? And
Yeah.
you know, and it's hard, especially when you're talking about writing, entertainment, movies, etc. I mean, there is no question that luck is involved. Like, no matter how like good you want to believe you are as a writer, it's luck. I can't put a percentage on it, but it's a huge percentage. You have to be in the right place in the right time, and um, you know, hopefully people remember that. Keep them humble or whatever. Um, I know so many brilliant writers who just haven't had the same exposure or the same opportunities I had. So, how do you make luck? I mean, that's a harder thing to answer, but as a math person, I always looked at it as back to the persistence thing. Like the more things I submitted, the more stories I wrote, the more things I put out into the world. That was another shot at being lucky. That was just another shot. And also at the same time, I was learning to become a better writer, and meeting people. And, so if and when like I did get a break, people, it's not to say it's a networking thing, but like, people were aware of who I was. I've been working, I've been around stubbornly for long enough. So, I mean, there's still no guarantee that, you're going to be lucky. I have two kids who are both pursuing arts, and I hope they can be as lucky as I was. At the same time, I hope that if it doesn't work out that way, that they still find arts were well worth pursuing. Just the pursuit of them in itself is a worthwhile thing, and I totally 100% believe that. I mean, it's probably glib and easy for me to say, but I would, even if I weren't selling things, I would probably still be writing weird stories.
Yeah, and I definitely think that's the difference, and I've had that put to me in like many different ways. The idea of, it's funnier like the more shots you take, or the more time and effort you put in,
Yeah.
or the longer you stick with it, the luckier you happen to become. And it's like that, the 10, the 20, the 30-year overnight success story.
Right.
It's like obviously everybody wants to believe, like we see a 15-second, I don't know, TikTok video of like the successful part, and everybody wants to believe it's like, oh, it's just you came up with one story and someone made it into a movie and now it's great, and you just sit at home with lots of money and it's fabulous. And it's like, not really. Like a lot of these people put in years upon
Yeah.
years upon years upon years of failures.
Right. And frankly, I think the way things work and are progressing now, I think it's harder. It's hard to have a career if you're like an overnight success. It is. I mean, because the publishing industry is built on first novels. You'll see a lot of first novels get a push, and if that first novel doesn't sell as many copies as the publisher hoped, then the next book doesn't get as much of a push. That doesn't sell as much, and then and those people are. I mean, it happened to me with my first two books. But I don't know. It's hard to say who has staying power, and even whatever that means. But I'm thankful that that I wasn't an overnight success, because I probably wouldn't have handled it very well. Just from like a a personal mental standpoint.
With horror movie, how have you personally, like I've seen, from online and from speaking to different people in the kind of like outer sphere of all this world, but for you personally, how do you feel like the reception has been to that title? And I mean, is that kind of story something that you would like to pursue more of? I feel like it's really, and I know that this probably wasn't an active thought from you, but the story itself feels really on the nose for like what's kind of become popular again now, and like a lot of people like that kind of like instantly. I was like, I want to see a movie, I want to see a TV show, I want to know more. Is there anything else in this like bigger universe that this all might exist in?
Yeah. Well, thank you. No, I mean, I'm very happy with how the book is done. Got some, I have to admit, I love seeing good reviews from like newspapers and stuff like that. I mean, that's always thrilling. I took like a book tour of the U.S. really for the first time this summer, and so many people came out, and that was just really humbling and a lot of fun. To get to talk and to connect with a bunch of readers. I've got all these friendship bracelets that a lot of people gave me that I have on my weird little wooden skeleton doll over here, because it looks better on him than it does me. But as far as like the story itself, like I just don't think in terms of like sequels, series. Now, I can say that the book has been optioned. I can't say by who yet, but it's really, I'm so beyond excited with who optioned it. So hopefully, as a film, not as a television show. Yeah, so I am excited. I think that would be a really fun book, to see on screen, because in a way, like again, like I mean, that book, it's going to have to be different. Like you can't do a lot of the things in the book on screen. As much as I would love to have like that 5 minute static shot of nothing. I hope we can get like a 2-minute one or something like that. Yeah. So I know, honestly, so for me, it's like, once I finish a novel, it's, I have to think about what's, the next thing. I'll allow myself to enjoy it. Certainly when the book comes out, but it's been out for 6 months now, and I like the book. I'm very proud of it. I think that book came pretty. I feel about that book like I do A Head Full of Ghosts in some ways. Like that, both of those books came as close to becoming the thing I wanted it to be, if that makes sense. Because I think everyone imagines, when you get the story idea, it's going to be this thing, and it always changes. But yeah, but those two books, I felt like those got as close as I could get to the thing I wanted it to be.
And another thing I feel like as well, and I don't know, for me, I think this one probably touched me more than some of the others, just in like the I guess the material and the whole story really like kind of bled into my world. And then I love to read, but I don't like, and this is again, look, there's lots of people, maybe they can't, they don't want to, they don't have the space, whatever, but there's nothing better to me than, like, for example, when I saw your book, to be able to take it off of a shelf and have a physical book and read that, and then like put it back on my bookshelf and have it like a collection.
Right.
And I feel like that maybe the idea of like the physical thing, it's kind of, I don't want to say it's come full circle. I know like people are still into streaming, people like audiobooks, people like Kindles and all these different things, but there's definitely, I think, a kind of, I don't know, feels like we're coming back around again, where people are valuing like the physical goods again.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, maybe. I mean, it seems like in music, that's certainly the case too, with sort of like how popular like vinyl has become and stuff like that. But that's another thing I honestly try not to think about. Not that it's not important, but like, it's hard enough for me to worry about writing the best book, and not worry about, what's it going to look like as an ebook, or what will it sound like as a audiobook. And I've been very lucky in the US, especially, that the audio team has really sort of done really beautiful productions, and especially with horror movie, they ended up doing like the screenplay as like a full dramatic cast reading, where you could hear like pages being flipped and actors like purposely flubbing lines and stuff like that. So it's like, that's so creative. I never even would have thought of that. It was great.
If there was a filmmaker, let's say, I suppose, do a double. So let's do an author and then do the filmmaker aspect. If there was one, past or present, that you could collaborate with on a project, who would you choose and why? Is there anyone that jumps out?
Author first? Oh boy. Yeah, that's hard to answer. Well, I collaborated with Stephen Graham Jones like a long time ago. Well, 15 years ago, I guess at this point. He and I co-wrote like a fun little young adult novel that's out of print. Maybe someday we'll bring it back into print. But I don't know, like some of my favorite writers, like I don't want to go in and mess up their stuff. I'd rather just read them than, actually like do the co-writing thing. But I would say, Mariana Enriquez or Stephen King. I know John Lang and I have, every once in a while we had an idea that we talked about that we would write something together. Filmmaker wise, there's so many directors that I admire, and including some friends like Alejandro Bruguez, who you had on. But I've at certain times, like for like wish list or dream list folks, like I've told my agents at certain points, like, oh, who should we get this book to? I was like, oh, you should get it to Jennifer Kent, or Rose Glass, for a more recent. Oh, not that Jennifer Kent isn't recent, but I just love Saint Maud so much. So yeah, I mean, there's just so many, film side. I mean, we could probably list a whole bunch of, continue filling up the podcast with a list of names that I'd love to see work on something that I wrote.
After you've finished, like when I don't know how the process works, but once you've kind of, I don't know, signed off on like this project is going away now and it's going to go through its, like, it's going through its process to everything to come together for this to be released. do you take time to like I don't know, like decompress and like have some time to just like, okay, I'm just gonna just exit creative writing mode for a little while, or is that something that you just can't switch off?
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably take like a week or two off or something like that, depending on depending on what's going on, or maybe I'll say yes to some short stories that I get asked to write. But yeah, no, there's certainly like I'll take a few days off. But then like the hard part for me is if I do take a week or two off, man, it's so hard to restart, and it does feel like I'm restarting from scratch again, and I don't like that feeling. So I try not to take too much time off. But sometimes it happens, and actually in other points in my writing life, it's good. I try to listen to, again, the subconscious or the inner part of yourself. Like if there's a reason why you want time off, maybe it's okay to take a little bit of time off. Um,
Mm.
but
That,
just for me to be aware is like, yeah, I can't, don't get sucked in. Don't take too much time off.
yeah, because that it was kind of tying into something I was going to ask next about like I talk to so many people like that are pursuing something creative and they struggle with maybe stepping out of that mode at
Mm,
times. And like, I've heard, I won't mention any names or anything, but I've heard some like people who it's nearly torn their like life apart from
mm,
the standpoint of like not being able to like, I feel like I'm always on like yeah, if I'm watching a movie, if I go out to
yeah.
dinner with my wife or my husband or whatever, and like they're kind of just talking, and I'm just like, yeah, but what if I do this? What if I do that?
Mm.
Like, is that something that you've ever struggled with, or have you always kind of, like you said about the subconscious, just being in control of like, okay, we're going out to eat or we're having a weekend away. I'm in control. We're
Yeah.
not doing this.
No, I mean, I'm sure. I mean, I know there have been times where, like, yeah, like you're in your own head when you probably shouldn't be, but it hasn't been a huge problem for me. I think a part of that has been, when I first started messing around with writing, it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to take a weekend and like write for 20 hours. And I have some friends who can do that, and I can't. For me, it's always been like an hour, hour and a half, two max chunks. Even now, like after 2 hours, for me, it's like it starts to become diminishing returns. I know I have to get up and walk away. The year I had off, I was able to sort of build that muscle and write for a little bit longer, but not much beyond two and a half. Some days like I could go take a walk, have lunch, exercise, and maybe come back and edit a little bit in the afternoon. Um, but certainly not while I'm, teaching, or if um, even someone like I know Joe Lansdale, like who's been a lifelong writer, is like, yeah, I can write for 3 hours, but that's about it. But
Mm,
like again, so much I do believe that so much of the process happens like when you're not actively writing. Which sounds like an excuse to not be writing, but no, like again, walking around, experiencing things, reading things, watching things, like little ideas, and it doesn't have to be like intrusive to your life. It's just like, oh yeah, this little thing, and that's what you keep a notebook, you write. That's for me the plus. So I write it down, then I can forget about it. I don't have to stew over it because it's there in this little notebook, and I know I'll go back to it tomorrow, and I can re-engage with it, more deeply.
for you, so you've had, like you've mentioned, the books have sold well. You've had so many different short stories published in like these huge publications globally. You've won the Bram Stoker Award, British Fantasy, among other things. You've had books optioned, you've had books turned into huge blockbuster movies. For you, I guess personally, like what is I don't want to say the motivation, but like um what would make you happy to, I guess, sit back and be like, that's why I don't know. Let's take
Yeah,
all, lots of people say, oh, the money and the this and that. And that's all, of course, everybody likes to be, everybody likes to be compensated for their hard work and their effort
yeah.
and everything. But like, if we take that out of it, what is it for you, like, that would make you happy to sit back in years to come and go, yeah, that was,
uh well, I mean, for me, like honestly, one of the big motivations is the next story. Like I want to, like one of the things I was really proud. I mean, not that I don't like some of my other books, but when I wrote A Head Full of Ghosts that did well, and Disappearance of Devil's Rock was really hard to write, but I was very proud of that book. But it certainly didn't sell like A Head Full of Ghosts did. I don't know. So besides just writing the next thing, is like, I want to write a book that shows, I can do it again. When I say whatever it means, like, do well, get nice reviews. And that just keeps coming back to me. It's like, oh, I want to show that I'm not done, that I can do it again. Like the next thing is a huge motivation. Geez, I don't think I've ever admitted this publicly either. But, I have like a few, I would call sort of like goofy pie in the sky dreams, but I think it's good to have those. Like, I'd love to win like a Booker or a National Book Award. Like, that'd be really cool to have like a horror novel sort of do that. Is this something I'm obsessing over? No, but like, I don't know, like for someone who just spent so much of his life daydreaming about things, I think it's healthy to have that. And if some come true, great. If some don't, I mean, I've already had so many sort of come true, not in the way I expected, but that's good too. It would be really kind of boring if I don't want to be a psychic. If your sort of daydream came true, I think that'd be a curse. Yeah.
Do you get a chance? I know you mentioned like there's always have a lot of stuff going on, so it's hard to kind of like find the time to like sit on the couch and like watch things. But do you get a chance to watch much I guess new stuff at times, or do you try and carve out times to maybe go to theater and catch a movie or catch something you want streaming?
I do. I probably should do more than I do. Listen, like, I don't want to like paint the picture that I'm either always reading or either always writing. I mean, I'm doing a lot of both, but like for me, it's sort of like you talked about like turning off that muscle. Like for me, my escape, my turning the brain off is I'm a huge sports fan. I just watch a lot of sports.
Yeah.
Probably way too much. Even like consuming, like, when I'm doing my exercises, I'll have like sports radio on and stuff like that. So for me, that's a little bit of my escape. Not that movies aren't. I wouldn't describe movies as my escape or books. Like to me, like I need those to be me. Whereas like just to not think about anything else is like, yeah, I throw sports on. Like I'm a competitive bastard. I'm a big sports fan.
Yeah, that makes sense. That actually does make a lot of sense, because I would say I'm nowhere near the degree or the level that you're at, but like a lot of this kind of content and conversation like is what my life revolves around. And then I train and teach jujitsu, kids jujitsu, and like that has kind of become, and like sports and stuff has kind of become my like where I feel like I could just maybe take off all this other stuff for a while and just do something completely different. Like you said, like the idea of even like sports radio or something like that, to have these things and just completely disconnect from everything is always nice. Is there something that you've had a chance to see recently that like stuck out to you, maybe horror adjacent or within that like scary realm, or is there something that's maybe on the horizon that you're excited to see?
Yeah, so I'm pulling up because my brain is so bad with titles. Well, I did see Nosferatu. I got an early screening with my daughter, which was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed the movie. It's beautifully made. I got to see a movie that's playing in the U.S. And the fun part is that you can only see it in a theater. It's not going to be on streaming or anything like that. It's a found footage movie called It Doesn't Get Any Better Than This. And I think it's just a really smart, really fun movie made, for $0. It's clearly that the filmmakers, love their project. I mean, it's really weird and disturbing. And I just love like their commitment to sort of the art of it. Like, I know that movie has, I got to speak to one of the filmmakers through email, has done well enough that they're being asked like, oh, hey, we want to distribute it. But as soon as they say no online, like the distributor's like, no. But it's going to get a run on Alamo and a bunch of Alamo theaters in the U.S. soon. So I would encourage folks, if that movie's playing near them, to go see it. Otherwise, I don't think any of the movies from the past year would be a surprise. Like I love Longlegs. I love weird stuff. The Devil's Bath was amazing. I saw The TV Glow. Those are definitely some of my favorite movies that I saw this year. I still have a lot more to catch up on.
You've really actually caught me there now with the It Doesn't Get Any Better Than This. Like instantly my interest is peaked there. I'm like, okay, I need to somehow figure out a way to be able to see this. I just a quick Google search there has showed lots of people seem to have the same thing, because it's like, wow, you can't see it anywhere else. How can I see this? I have to find out how to see it. Really unique idea, actually. So I guess going forward, then, I know like there's probably a lot of stuff that goes on behind the scenes that you can't talk about. You mentioned horror movie being optioned and different things like that, and I'm sure we'll all find out in due course. But from this point on, then, where does one go from here, or like what do you I don't know, foresee or hope for your future?
I mean, other than like specifics, like I have a middle grade horror novel coming out this summer called Another. It's sort of a riff on a body snatcher kind of story, not alien, something else, sort of quasi supernatural. And it wasn't like I was planning a pivot to writing middle grade. I just happened to have a story idea from the point of view of a 12-year-old, a sixth grade protagonist. So I certainly didn't approach the writing like, oh, I'm going to write this like a middle grade novel. I wrote this like a short novel, so 50,000 words, from the point of view of a 12-year-old. No swearing, not a lot of violence, but that was because the story didn't necessitate those things. And also right now, like all my focus, my creative focus and regular focus is on my next novel, adult novel. It's due, a draft is due to my publisher in May. And so this book has been kind of fun. I'm not going to say the title of it just yet. I'm a little nervous to let it out. It's going to be more of like a mishmash of genres. Like, there are going to be parts that are certainly horrific. And I think the whole story is like, to me, the most existentially horrific thing. But there's going to be, some science fiction and hopefully some humor too, like all of it sort of mixed in. So, we'll see. I'm in the dreaded middle part.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah.
So final question then, and obviously you can tailor it as much as you need to your case specifically, but I always ask, why horror and what does it mean to you? Because I definitely feel like, maybe some of your work is not straight horror or anything, but there's definitely, I feel like a lot of people that are into horror and maybe always thought they were into just like straight horror and that's what I like, have discovered your work, and even if it's not at times, a specific, it is definitely in that that sphere. And then obviously with your newest book, I mean, the title of the book is horror movie. So like a lot of people, I think, that maybe didn't read your work before now, that are just in like the horror movie world or whatever, discovered that and then maybe worked backwards.
That'd be
but
great.
For you personally, like what is it that kind of draws you to the, I don't know, the dark and intense?
Well, I mean, how much time do we have? I know we don't have much time left. So I mean, I caveat that it's a long answer. And so I feel like I'm of two minds of it. So we'll go with a high-minded, quote, call it high-minded for lack of a better term, part first. That, my favorite. So all stories, whether it's, novel, short story, movie, or art in general, like tries to reveal a truth, right? And so in a horror story, it's a reveal of a terrible truth. It could be any kind of truth, like personal, societal, universal, cosmic. And I don't know, I feel like horror stories can really get at like the hardest questions, like, or those hardest truths, in really interesting ways. And so that's what excites me. Like my favorite horror stories tend to have like that truth reveal, but then that's not the end. It then asks like the hardest questions, like how does anybody live through this? And or get like really weird, something like Long Legs, just like this weird thing that describes a set of emotions that you can't otherwise. So yeah, I mean, that's me, like, oh, the adult thinking about horror, but monsters are also just cool. Like, I mean, there's that weird kid. I shouldn't even say kid. It's a very human thing. As dark and messed up and horrific as it can be, that excitement of possibility, like, oh, like even though I don't know if you do a video component for this, but even though like you have, like as a kid, like Godzilla was my gateway. It's like there was that thought. I was like, wouldn't that be cool if it was real? But no, it wouldn't be, because people would be dying. It'd be mass destruction. But just the idea that this giant monster could survive, like there's this weird, like, oh, this wonder, the awe of horror. So to me, it's like all a mix of that.
I love that answer, because it's like, I always find it so hard when someone asks me that, like, what's the,
Yeah.
I don't want to call it an obsession, but like, what's the fascination with like that kind of stuff? I'm like, it's very hard to like sometimes articulate why or what it is, but it is that idea of like that wonderment that you know, and then everybody has their story about their gateway into that kind of realm, and it's like, I just love that experience of when I find a good book or a good movie or whatever it might be, and I can just go to this other place, and even if it is dark and scary and whatever, but I can kind of experience that in like a safe way. Like at all times, I know that I'm okay and like nothing's actually happening, but to be able to be transported, I guess, somewhere else, and I find, and this is not, I would say probably across the board for me personally, I always find that probably more intense with a good novel than a movie, if that makes sense. Like I've had some great experiences at the movie theater, or you know, watching something at home alone in the dark, but there's something I think about a good story and a good book that when you really get into it, there's, I don't know if there's an experience like it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, that's another one of like the fun sort of joys of my life, was to discover, as someone who was like just watching nothing but movies and then came to reading later in life. You know, I definitely read more books than I watch movies now, and it's no shade to movies. It's like I'm drawn to what you sort of described, you know, the affect of reading a story. I mean, don't get me wrong, movies are still gonna affect me more viscerally in the moment and give me nightmares, but like it's the book or the story that I'll continue to think about and sort of live in for longer.
Yeah, I love that. One final quick question, actually, before I let you go. What way do you like to consume your reading? Is it a Kindle? Is it a physical book? Is it
Physical books. I hate reading digitally. Sometimes I have to, like if people are sending me like ebook early copies to read. I just don't read as well or as deeply with digitally, and maybe it's just me being stubborn. And you know, I've experienced like reading something digitally and then actually rereading it in the text. I'm like, oh man, I got way more out of it this time. Yeah, part of that was it was a second read through, but yeah, no, I have way too many physical books in the house. It actually, I wish I could read more digitally, that I wouldn't have like the hundreds and hundreds of books. Yeah.
Yeah, I tried so hard. I got a Kindle a couple of years ago, and I loaded it with lots of stuff, and I had everything, you know, set out, and I just, I don't know, I could not relate to a lot of the stuff the same way I can when I've got that physical book. I cannot do it.
Yeah, same.
But like I said, Paul, it's been a pleasure. I would love to revisit and have another conversation, maybe at the tail end of the year. Maybe we'll have some news on our movie being optioned and other stuff. It'd be great to hear from you again.
Yeah, thank you, Aaron. And actually, yeah, absolutely.
So let's stay in touch. For everybody listening, the links to all of Paul's stuff will be down below in the description, either on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or all good podcast hosts. And yeah, it was a pleasure having you on, man. I wish you all the best for the upcoming year. And yeah, let's speak soon.
Yeah, thank you. And you too.
Thanks.